Karen Thompson wasn't like most tourists who visited famous landmarks with wide-eyed wonder and polite curiosity. She was loud, bold, and always ready to voice her opinions, whether they were asked for or not. Hailing from a quiet little town in the Midwest, Karen often felt out of place in her own life. Her days were filled with routine, working at a small office job, watching TV shows about royal families, and dreaming of adventures far beyond her ordinary existence. So when she finally saved enough money for a trip to London, she saw it as her golden ticket to excitement. This was her chance to step into a world of grandeur and history, something completely different from the humdrum life she knew. From the moment Karen stepped off the plane, she was determined to make the most of her vacation. Armed with a camera hanging around her neck, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a tote bag stuffed with snacks, she marched through London with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. To Karen, this trip wasn't just about sightseeing. It was about proving herself, proving that she could be part of something bigger, even if only for a week. On her third day in the city, Karen found herself standing outside Buckingham Palace, one of the most iconic landmarks in the world. The palace grounds buzzed with activity. Tourists snapping photos, children pointing excitedly at the guards, and guides explaining the history of the monarchy. Karen joined the crowd, taking in the majestic architecture and imagining what it must feel like to live such a lavish life. But soon, her attention shifted to the royal guards stationed near the gates. Clad in their striking red tunics and towering bearskin hats, they stood perfectly still, almost like statues. Karen tilted her head, squinting at one of the guards. He didn't move a muscle, no matter how many people passed by or took pictures. At first, she thought it was impressive, the discipline, the focus. But then, annoyance crept in. Why wouldn't he acknowledge anyone? Didn't he realize all these people had traveled from faraway places just to see him? To Karen, his stoic demeanor felt less like professionalism and more like arrogance. She moved closer, ignoring the signs politely reminding visitors not to touch or disturb the guards. "Hey, buddy," she called out, waving her hand inches from his face. When there was no reaction, not even a blink, she crossed her arms and scowled. Other tourists glanced at her, some amused, others disapproving. Karen didn't care. In fact, their reactions only fueled her frustration. Who did this guy think he was, ignoring her like that? Was he trying to make her look stupid in front of everyone? As she stood there, stewing in her irritation, an idea began forming in her mind. If he wouldn't respond to words, maybe he'd respond to action. Without fully thinking it through, Karen reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister of pepper spray. It was something she carried everywhere, a habit born out of watching too many crime dramas back home. At first, she hesitated, laughing nervously at her own audacity. But the guard's unwavering silence pushed her over the edge. "This'll show him," she muttered under her breath, half joking, half serious. And before she could second-guess herself, Karen pressed down on the nozzle, releasing a quick burst of spray directly at the guard's face. For a split second, everything seemed frozen. The crowd gasped, the guard staggered, and Karen's heart skipped a beat. That fleeting moment of satisfaction quickly turned into sheer panic as alarms blared and chaos erupted around her. Karen couldn't believe what she had just done. The pepper spray hung limply in her hand as the guard staggered backward, tearing off his towering bearskin hat and coughing violently. His once stoic expression was replaced by one of pain and shock, his eyes watering uncontrollably as he tried to wave away the invisible cloud that now surrounded him. For a moment, Karen thought maybe this was part of the act, that the guard would straighten up, laugh it off, and everything would go back to normal. But then the alarms started blaring. The piercing sound echoed across the palace grounds, cutting through the chatter of tourists and sending a wave of panic rippling through the crowd. People screamed, scattering in all directions like startled birds. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them close as they hurried away from the scene. Cameras that had been aimed at the guards moments earlier were now pointed at Karen, capturing every second of the unfolding chaos. Some bystanders looked horrified, while others seemed almost entertained, whispering behind cupped hands about the crazy American who had lost her mind. Karen stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Her initial burst of bravado vanished the instant she saw the guard's reaction. What had she been thinking? This wasn't some harmless prank. It was an attack on a member of the Queen's Guard, right outside Buckingham Palace. The gravity of her actions hit her like a ton of bricks. She wanted to run, to disappear into the crowd, but her legs refused to move. All she could do was watch as several other guards rushed toward her, their faces grim and determined. "Stay where you are," one of them barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Karen flinched, dropping the canister of pepper spray as if it had burned her fingers. Two guards closed in on her, their rifles slung over their shoulders, their boots thudding against the pavement. They didn't say another word as they took hold of her arms, twisting them behind her back and snapping handcuffs into place. Karen winced at the cold metal biting into her wrists, but she didn't resist. How could she? There was no denying what she had done. The evidence was everywhere, the guard still coughing nearby, the lingering smell of pepper spray in the air, and the dozens of photos being taken by shocked onlookers. As the guards led her away, Karen caught glimpses of the faces around her. Some people stared openly, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others quickly turned away, pretending not to notice. A few even snapped photos of her, their phones held high as they captured the spectacle. One woman muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like "unbelievable," while a man nearby said, loud enough for Karen to hear, "What kind of person does something like that?" Her cheeks burned with shame, but there was nothing she could do to escape the spotlight. Every step felt heavier than the last, each movement dragging her closer to consequences she hadn't fully considered until now. As they passed through the gates and into a more secluded area of the palace grounds, Karen realized how much trouble she was in. This wasn't just some minor incident. It was a full-blown international fiasco, and she was at the center of it. Once inside a small security office, the guards handed her over to police officers who arrived within minutes. The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. One officer began asking questions, his tone calm but firm. "Can you explain what happened?" he asked, pen poised over a notepad. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she possibly justify spraying pepper spray at a royal guard? It sounded absurd even to her own ears. Instead, she stammered out fragments of an explanation, trying to piece together the jumble of thoughts racing through her mind. I didn't mean to hurt anyone," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. I don't know what I thought. It was stupid. So stupid." Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality of the situation sank in deeper. She wasn't just facing embarrassment or a slap on the wrist. This was serious. Deadly serious. By the time the officers finished questioning her, news outlets had already picked up the story. Headlines flashed across social media. Tourist assaults Royal Guard at Buckingham Palace. American woman causes chaos outside historic landmark. Photos of Karen circulated online, showing her wide-eyed and disheveled as she was led away in handcuffs. Back home, friends and family began receiving messages from acquaintances who recognized her face. By the end of the day, Karen's name, and her mistake, would be known worldwide. The police car ride to the station felt like an eternity for Karen. Her hands were still cuffed behind her back, and every bump in the road sent a jolt of discomfort through her wrists. She stared out the window, watching London blur past. Streets she had been so eager to explore just hours earlier now seemed cold and unwelcoming. Her mind raced with questions. What would happen next? Would she go to jail? How could she possibly explain this to her family or her coworkers back home? The weight of her actions pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. When they arrived at the station, Karen was ushered into a small, sterile interrogation room. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the table in the center of the room. An officer entered shortly after, carrying a folder and a notepad. He introduced himself as Detective Harris and sat down across from her. His demeanor was calm but firm, his eyes studying her carefully as if trying to gauge whether she truly understood the seriousness of her situation. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Why did you do it?" Karen hesitated, her throat dry. She wanted to explain herself, to make him understand that she hadn't meant any harm. But how could she put into words something that even she didn't fully comprehend? Taking a deep breath, she began recounting the events leading up to the incident. The frustration she'd felt when the guard ignored her, the growing irritation, and finally, the reckless decision to use pepper spray. As she spoke, her voice wavered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wasn't thinking," she admitted, her head bowed in shame. "It was stupid. I don't know why I did it." Detective Harris listened silently, jotting down notes as she talked. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, his tone measured but heavy with implication. Karen shook her head, though she already knew the answer. This wasn't just about embarrassing herself. It was about violating protocol, disrespecting tradition, and causing harm to someone whose sole purpose was to protect the monarchy. While Karen sat in the interrogation room, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media platforms lit up with posts and memes mocking her actions. Photos of her being led away by officers went viral, accompanied by captions like "Tourist mistakes guard for statue" and "American versus British discipline." Comment sections filled with criticism, jokes, and outrage. Some people defended her, saying everyone makes mistakes, but the majority condemned her behavior, calling her entitled and disrespectful. Back at Buckingham Palace, the royal guard she had attacked was receiving medical attention. Though the effects of the pepper spray weren't life-threatening, they left him coughing and struggling to catch his breath for several hours. Fellow guards and staff members rallied around him, offering support and ensuring he was okay. Meanwhile, palace officials issued a brief statement condemning the assault and emphasizing the importance of respecting those who serve in uniform. As the day wore on, Karen's lawyer arrived at the station, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude. He introduced himself as Mr. Edwards. After speaking privately with Karen, he met with Detective Harris to discuss potential charges. Assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard was no minor offense. It carried significant legal ramifications, including hefty fines and possible jail time. However, Mr. Edwards suggested negotiating a plea deal, hoping to minimize the damage and avoid further escalation. By the time Karen was released on bail later that evening, the world had already formed its opinion of her. Walking out of the station, she kept her head down, shielding her face with her hands as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. "Karen, why did you attack the guard?" one journalist demanded. Another yelled, "Do you regret your actions?" She didn't respond, climbing into a waiting taxi instead. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but said nothing, likely recognizing her from the news. As the taxi drove away, Karen stared blankly out the window, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. She thought about the guard again, the way he had staggered backward, gasping for air, and how she had stood there frozen, unable to undo what she had done. For the first time in her life, she truly understood the meaning of regret. It wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was a heavy burden that weighed on her heart and mind, refusing to let go. And as the city lights flickered past, she realized this was only the beginning of a long, difficult journey toward redemption, or perhaps punishment. The days following Karen's arrest felt like a whirlwind of confusion, shame, and mounting consequences. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story, and it seemed like everywhere she turned. Online, on TV, Even in casual conversations, her face was plastered alongside headlines that painted her as reckless, disrespectful, and out of control. The phrase "American tourist pepper sprays Royal Guard" became a punchline for late-night comedians and internet trolls alike. Memes mocked her actions, turning her into an international laughingstock. But for Karen, there was nothing funny about the situation. Back home, the fallout hit hard. Friends and coworkers who had once been eager to hear about her trip now avoided her calls and messages. Social media notifications flooded her phone, not with likes or comments of support, but with angry messages from strangers criticizing her behavior. Even her neighbors whispered behind closed doors, shaking their heads at the scandal. Her small Midwestern town, known for its quiet charm and tight-knit community, suddenly felt suffocating. Karen stopped going out altogether, too embarrassed to face anyone who might recognize her. Her lawyer, Mr. Edwards, worked tirelessly to negotiate a plea deal that would spare her jail time. He explained to Karen that while assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard wasn't taken lightly, the court might show leniency if she expressed genuine remorse and agreed to certain conditions. These included paying restitution, attending anger management classes, and performing community service. Still reeling from the weight of her mistake, Karen readily agreed. Anything to put this nightmare behind her, or so she thought. In the meantime, the Royal Guard she had attacked continued to recover. Though physically unharmed after receiving medical treatment, the emotional toll lingered. Serving in the Queen's Guard was no ordinary job. It required discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. Being assaulted on duty wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. Yet despite everything, the Guard chose not to dwell on bitterness. In a brief statement released by palace officials, he thanked the public for their support and expressed hope that the incident wouldn't overshadow the honor of his role. His grace under pressure only deepened Karen's feelings of guilt. As weeks passed, Karen began to reflect on the ripple effects of her actions. She realized how much harm one impulsive decision could cause, not just to herself, but to others as well. The Guard had been doing his job, standing tall as a symbol of tradition and loyalty, while she had acted selfishly, prioritizing her ego over respect. For the first time in her life, Karen started questioning her own behavior patterns. Why did she always feel the need to assert dominance? Why couldn't she handle discomfort without lashing out? One evening, sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Karen stumbled upon a documentary about the history of the British monarchy. It featured interviews with current and former members of the Queen's Guard, detailing the rigorous training and sacrifices required to serve in such a prestigious position. Watching the footage, Karen felt a lump form in her throat. She saw the hours of practice, the physical strain, the pride these individuals took in representing their country, and she remembered the way she had treated one of them like a prop for her amusement. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to herself, "What have I done?" Determined to make amends, Karen reached out to organizations that supported veterans and active duty service members. At first, her intentions were purely self-serving, a way to salvage her reputation. But as she spent more time volunteering, something shifted inside her. Listening to stories from soldiers who had served overseas, hearing about their struggles and triumphs, Karen began to understand the true meaning of sacrifice and respect. She threw herself into the work, organizing fundraisers, packing care packages, and even speaking publicly about accountability and personal growth. Though her efforts earned her some forgiveness from those around her, Karen knew she couldn't undo the past. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw the woman who had made headlines for all the wrong reasons, but she also saw someone trying to change, someone learning to take responsibility for her actions and striving to be better. Redemption wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but Karen clung to the hope that someday people might remember her for more than just her biggest mistake. Little did she know, the hardest part of her journey was yet to come. Karen's journey toward redemption was far from smooth. While volunteering and working to rebuild her life, she faced constant reminders of the incident that had turned her world upside down. Every news article, every meme, Every whispered comment about that American woman served as a painful echo of her mistake. But what hurt most was the realization that apologies didn't erase consequences. No matter how hard she tried to make amends, the past lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. One chilly autumn morning, Karen received a letter in the mail. It was from Buckingham Palace, a summons of sorts, requesting her presence at a private meeting with palace officials. Her stomach churned as she read the formal language of the letter. Was this another punishment? A chance to apologize directly? Or worse, a final condemnation of her actions? She called Mr. Edwards immediately, her voice trembling as she asked for advice. "Go," he said firmly. "This is your opportunity to show genuine remorse. Don't waste it." The day of the meeting arrived, and Karen dressed carefully, choosing simple, respectful clothing. She wanted nothing more than to convey humility, though she doubted anything could soften the blow of what she had done. As she walked through the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, escorted by a stern-looking official, Karen felt incredibly small. The ornate chandeliers, towering portraits of monarchs, and richly decorated walls only emphasized how out of place she was in this world of tradition and dignity. She was led into a modest office where two palace representatives awaited her. One was an older man with sharp eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. The other was a younger woman with a calm but authoritative demeanor. They greeted her politely but made no effort to mask their seriousness. After offering her a seat, the older man began speaking. "We've reviewed your case thoroughly," he said, his tone measured. "Your lawyer has assured us of your willingness to take responsibility for your actions. However, we must stress that assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard is not merely a legal issue. It's an affront to centuries of tradition and service." Karen nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand," she said softly. "And I'm so sorry. I never meant to cause harm or disrespect. I acted impulsively, and I deeply regret it." The younger woman leaned forward slightly. "Words are important, Miss Thompson, but actions speak louder. You've taken steps to volunteer and give back, which is commendable. But true accountability means understanding why your actions mattered and ensuring they don't happen again." For the next hour, Karen listened intently as the representatives explained the significance of the Queen's Guard, not just as protectors, but as symbols of national pride and unity. They spoke of the rigorous training each guard endured, the sacrifices they made, and the honor they carried on behalf of their country. By the end of the conversation, tears streamed down Karen's face. She realized she hadn't just hurt one person. She had disrespected an entire institution. Before leaving, Karen was handed a document outlining additional requirements for her restitution. Alongside financial penalties and community service, she would need to write a formal apology letter to the guard she had attacked. Though daunting, Karen accepted the terms without hesitation. For the first time, she saw these demands not as punishments, but as opportunities to prove she was truly sorry. In the weeks that followed, Karen poured her heart into writing the apology letter. She described her regret, acknowledged the gravity of her actions, and expressed gratitude for the guard's resilience and professionalism. When the letter was complete, she mailed it off, hoping it might bring some measure of peace to both parties. Though the process was exhausting, Karen found herself growing stronger with each step. She began attending anger management classes, where she learned techniques to manage frustration and communicate more effectively. She also continued volunteering, finding solace in helping others who had sacrificed so much. Slowly but surely, Karen started to rebuild her sense of self-worth, not as someone defined by a single mistake, but as someone capable of change. Still, challenges remained. Friends and family were slow to forgive, and strangers online showed little mercy. Yet Karen refused to let bitterness consume her. Instead, she focused on the lessons she had learned. That respect is earned, that actions have lasting consequences, and that redemption takes time. Each day brought new hurdles, but also new chances to grow. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Karen clung to one truth: She was determined to become a better version of herself. Months passed, and Karen's life began to take on a new rhythm. The initial chaos of her arrest and the media frenzy had died down, but the scars of her actions remained, both for her and for those affected by her reckless decision. While she worked tirelessly to rebuild her reputation, Karen couldn't help but wonder if her efforts were making any real difference. Would people ever see her as more than the woman who pepper-sprayed a royal guard? And would she ever truly forgive herself? One crisp spring morning, Karen arrived at a local veterans center where she had been volunteering regularly. Over time, she had grown close to some of the members, particularly a retired Army veteran named James. A soft-spoken man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor, James often shared stories about his time in service, teaching Karen valuable lessons about discipline, teamwork, and sacrifice. Today, however, he greeted her with an unusual request. "Karen," he said, motioning for her to sit beside him. "There's something I think you should do." Curious, Karen leaned in. "What is it?" James handed her a flyer advertising a public speaking event hosted by a nearby community organization. The theme was Learning from Mistakes, Stories of Growth and Redemption. He explained that the group was looking for speakers willing to share personal experiences of failure and transformation. "I think you'd be perfect for this," he said gently. "You've come so far, and your story could inspire others who feel stuck in their own mistakes." At first, Karen balked at the idea. Public speaking. About that day, the thought made her stomach churn. What if people judged her? What if they laughed or booed her off stage? But as James continued encouraging her, pointing out how much she had already accomplished, Karen started to see the potential. Maybe sharing her story wasn't just about redemption, it was about helping others avoid similar pitfalls. After days of deliberation, and plenty of practice runs in front of her bathroom mirror, Karen agreed to participate. On the evening of the event, she stood backstage, clutching her notes tightly, her heart pounding like a drum. As she listened to other speakers recount their struggles, a recovering addict finding sobriety, a former convict rebuilding his life, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps her words could resonate too. When it was her turn, Karen stepped onto the stage, blinking under the bright lights. She scanned the audience, taking a deep breath before beginning. "My name is Karen Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "And I'm here today because I made a mistake, a big one that changed my life forever." For the next 10 minutes, Karen recounted the events leading up to that fateful day outside Buckingham Palace. She spoke candidly about her frustration, her impulsivity, and the moment she realized the gravity of what she had done. She described the aftermath, the shame, the judgment, the long road toward accountability. But she also talked about the lessons she had learned, the importance of respecting others, the value of humility, and the power of second chances. By the end of her speech, the room was silent except for the sound of scattered applause. Slowly, the clapping grew louder, until the entire audience was on its feet. Karen blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the response. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a punchline or a cautionary tale. She felt like someone worth listening to. The next day, Karen received messages from attendees thanking her for her honesty and vulnerability. One woman wrote, "Your story reminded me that we all make mistakes, but it's never too late to change." Another man shared how hearing her speak inspired him to repair a strained relationship with his family. Reading these words, Karen felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Still, not everyone was ready to forgive her. Back home, online comments continued to criticize her past behavior, and some acquaintances kept their distance. But Karen no longer let those voices define her. Instead, she focused on the positive impact she could have moving forward, whether through volunteering, mentoring young adults, or simply being more mindful in her daily interactions. She committed herself to living a life rooted in kindness and respect. As spring turned to summer, Karen reflected on how far she had come. Though the memory of that chaotic day still lingered, it no longer controlled her. She had faced her mistakes head-on, taken responsibility, and worked hard to make amends. Most importantly, she had discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, a resilience born not from avoiding failure, but from embracing it. But even as Karen celebrated her progress, she knew one chapter of her journey remained unfinished. Somewhere out there was the royal guard she had wronged, the man whose stoic silence had once for us. Karen's life had taken on a quiet rhythm by the time autumn rolled around again. She spent her days volunteering, speaking at community events, and working to rebuild her sense of purpose. Yet, despite all her efforts, one question lingered in the back of her mind. What about the guard? The man she had wronged so deeply that day outside Buckingham Palace. Had he moved on from the incident? Did he harbor any lingering resentment toward her? Karen couldn't shake the feeling that her journey toward redemption wouldn't truly be complete until she faced him directly. One evening, while scrolling through an online article about the Queen's Guard, Karen stumbled upon something unexpected. A brief mention of a charity event hosted by former members of the Royal Guards. It was scheduled to take place in London later that month, with proceeds going to support veterans and their families. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the details. Could this be her chance to finally meet the guard she had assaulted? To apologize face to face? Determined not to let fear hold her back, Karen booked a flight to London. This time, however, she wasn't traveling as a tourist eager for adventure. She was returning with a clear mission: to confront her past and seek forgiveness in person. As the plane touched down, Karen felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. She knew there were no guarantees the guard would want to see her or even remember who she was, but she owed it to herself and to him to try. The charity event was held in a grand hall adorned with banners celebrating the history of the Royal Guards. Karen arrived early, clutching a small bouquet of flowers she hoped might soften the awkwardness of their potential meeting. Guests mingled around her, swapping stories and laughter, but Karen's focus remained sharp. She scanned the room nervously, searching for the familiar figure she remembered from that fateful day. Finally, she spotted him. He stood near the stage, chatting casually with another attendee. Though his uniform was gone, replaced by a simple suit, Karen recognized him instantly. The same steady posture, the same calm demeanor. For a moment, she froze, unsure if she should approach him. But then she reminded herself why she had come. Taking a deep breath, she walked over, her steps slow but deliberate. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice trembling. The guard turned to face her, his expression unreadable at first. Then recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by surprise. "You're the woman from before," he said, his tone neutral. Karen nodded, clutching the bouquet tightly. "Yes, it's me. And I need to say something." Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued. "I am so sorry for what I did to you. I can't imagine how humiliating and painful that must have been. I acted out of frustration and ignorance, and I've regretted it every single day since." The guard studied her for a long moment, his gaze steady. Finally, he sighed and nodded slightly. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but I've moved past it. We're trained to endure difficult situations. It's part of the job." His words stung, but they also gave Karen hope. "I understand," she replied, her voice breaking. "And I'll never stop being grateful for your professionalism that day. But please know, I'm trying to be better, to learn from my mistakes." To her relief, the guard offered a faint smile. "That's good to hear," he said. "Everyone deserves the second chance." They spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging polite conversation before parting ways. Though their interaction was brief, it left Karen feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time, she felt like she had truly faced the person she had wronged, and found a glimmer of peace in the process. On her flight home, Karen reflected on the encounter. She realized that forgiveness wasn't always dramatic or immediate. Sometimes it came in quiet moments of understanding. And while she knew the memory of that day would always stay with her, she also knew she had done everything within her power to make things right. As the plane soared above the clouds, Karen closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel a rare sense of closure. She didn't expect the world to forget her mistake, or even fully forgive her, but that wasn't the point anymore. What mattered was that she had grown. She had learned. And most importantly, she had tried. Years passed, and Karen's life settled into a quiet rhythm of purpose and reflection. The incident outside Buckingham Palace remained a part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she carried it with her as a lesson, a reminder of how quickly actions can spiral out of control, and the importance of owning up to one's mistakes. Though the scars of that day lingered in occasional nightmares or fleeting moments of self-doubt, Karen had learned to face them head-on, using them as stepping stones toward growth. Back in her small Midwestern town, Karen became known for her dedication to helping others. She continued volunteering at veterans organizations, organizing fundraisers, and mentoring young adults who struggled with impulse control or anger management. Her speeches about accountability and redemption gained traction, eventually leading to invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and even corporate events. People were drawn to her honesty and vulnerability, finding inspiration in her ability to turn failure into fuel for positive change. One crisp winter morning, Karen received an email that caught her off guard. It was from a documentary filmmaker who had stumbled across her story online. Intrigued by her journey, from reckless tourist to advocate for personal growth, the filmmaker wanted to feature her in a short film exploring themes of regret, forgiveness, and transformation. At first, Karen hesitated. Reliving those painful memories on camera felt daunting, especially after working so hard to leave them behind. But something about the filmmaker's passion convinced her to say yes. The filming process was emotional, forcing Karen to revisit moments she'd rather forget. Yet, as she shared her story with the crew, she realized how far she had come. The woman on screen, speaking candidly about her mistakes and what she had learned, was unrecognizable from the impulsive, frustrated tourist she once was. When the documentary aired months later, it resonated deeply with audiences worldwide. Viewers praised Karen's courage and authenticity, calling her story a powerful reminder that everyone deserves a second chance. Despite the newfound attention, Karen remained grounded. She knew better than anyone that forgiveness wasn't a destination. It was a continuous journey. Some days were harder than others, particularly when old headlines resurfaced or strangers recognized her in public. But each challenge only strengthened her resolve to live intentionally, treating others with the respect and kindness she wished she had shown years ago. In quieter moments, Karen often thought about the Royal Guard. Though their brief meeting at the charity event had been polite, it left her wondering if he ever thought about her, or if he had truly moved on. One day, while scrolling through social media, she came across a post celebrating his retirement from service. The caption described him as a devoted protector of tradition and a beloved figure within the palace community. Seeing his smiling face brought a bittersweet smile to Karen's lips. Whatever pain she had caused him, he had risen above it, embodying the discipline and grace she admired so much. As time went on, Karen began to see her past not as a burden, but as a gift. Without that chaotic moment outside Buckingham Palace, she might never have discovered her capacity for growth, or the strength that comes from facing one's deepest regrets. Every volunteer shift, every speech, and every connection she made reminded her of this truth. Mistakes are inevitable, but they don't have to define us. What matters is what we do afterward. Today, Karen lives a simple yet fulfilling life. She spends her weekends gardening, reading books about history, and hosting gatherings for friends she's met along the way. Her home is filled with photos of smiling faces, young people she's mentored, veterans she's supported, and communities she's touched. Each picture tells a story of resilience, hope, and the power of second chances. Though the memory of that fateful day will always linger, Karen has learned to carry it lightly. It's not the weight of shame anymore. It's the spark that ignited her transformation. And as she looks back on her journey, she knows one thing for certain. Sometimes, the hardest lessons lead to the most meaningful growth.